It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. This month, I'm spending time with my favorite of Doctor Who's doctors, Doctor number 3, Jon Pertwee. The first 2 weeks of this month, I covered 2 very good 7-part stories from season number 7. Those were Doctor Who and the Silurians and Inferno. This week, we go to the final story in season 10, The Green Death. Now, as Pertwee stepped into the role of the Doctor in that 7th season, he was earthbound, having been exiled by the Time Lords for his constant meddling with the natural progression of various beings and planets' events. Unlike with the second Doctor before him, he did not inherit any companions. Instead, he got a job with his old friend, Brigadier Alistair Lethbridge-Stewart, as UNIT's new science advisor. There, he would work closely with Liz Shaw, another scientific advisor at the military organization. In the 7th season, the series were retooled to be inspired heavily by the sci-fi monster series Quatermass. However, after that 7th season's conclusion, things would return to a slightly more normal feel for Doctor Who. The aliens that came to Earth to give the Doctor something to do were of the likes of the Daleks and the Master. The latter would become a staple for the series and someone fans would become very familiar with. The former was exactly the type of heavy that fans expected from the series anyway. So since we're talking about villains, Jon Pertwee was in the role of the Doctor for 5 seasons, second longest of anyone in the classic era, and he is the only Doctor to have not faced the Cybermen. But I digress. With Terror of the Autons, the premiere story of season 8, Pertwee's Doctor would face the Master for the very first time and be paired with his new companion, Jo Grant, played by the bubbly Katie Manning. Last week, I talked about how Liz left UNIT and stopped working with the Doctor kind of surprisingly. She was one of the very few companions to not get a proper send-off story. She just left. As stated in Terror of the Autons, she didn't want to just hand the Doctor test tubes and tell him how brilliant he is. That is actually also a line that is brought back up by Jo in this serial. But that brings Jo into the show, and it was kind of a returning Doctor Who back to its roots of having a younger, fresher, kind of hipper companion that seemed closer to the median age of the viewer at home. Now, I find Liz to have been a breath of fresh air, having someone truly intelligent and able to speak and understand the Doctor's language. That said, Katie Manning's Jo is the companion of this era. Every Doctor has his quintessential companion. For Pertwee, it's the 3 seasons he spent with Jo. And at the start of season 10, Jo and the Doctor would be matched with Patrick Troughton's second Doctor, with guidance on the TARDIS's view screen from William Hartnell's first Doctor. And Hartnell did not get into the action on set due to his failing health, but the serial, The Three Doctors, was the first multi-Doctor story, something that has now almost come to be expected for anniversaries, and sometimes not even for anniversaries, as it turns out. But after defeating the renegade Time Lord Omega, the Doctor would get a brand new dematerializing circuit for the TARDIS, as well as the Time Lords restoring his knowledge of how to operate the time machine, and ultimately his exile was lifted. Now, while the 3 stories between the premiere of The Three Doctors and the finale, The Green Death, would return the Doctor to the spaceways with Jo, he did still return to UNIT time and again, and especially for this finale of the season. And I should note that the Time Lords would send the Doctor and Jo on special missions back in season 9, and actually once in season 8. But Doctor Who was finally back to the original concept of the Doctor and his friends sailing through time and space, mostly thanks to the popularity of the show being returned and put back up as a very, very almost must-see TV type of program with Pertwee's portrayal of the Doctor. But we'll talk next week about the next major jump in popularity. But for now, Let's check out what the heck is going on here that leads to the Green Death. So our story starts in a Wales town that I will never be able to pronounce, so I'm not even going to try. Seriously, Wales, what's the story with your language? But there, a miner is scurrying around an abandoned coal mine, and on his hand is a glowing green infection that is spreading. Meanwhile, Global Chemicals is opening a research facility right outside where this closed mine is located. Professor Clifford Jones, the head of an environmentalist organization, is protesting Global Chemicals, and this is somewhat founded when the miner is discovered dead and almost entirely glowing green. At UNIT, the Doctor makes repairs to the TARDIS to make a long-planned trip with Joe to the planet Metabolus 3, a planet with a blue sun and a lot of large blue sapphires. And meanwhile, Joe reads about the goings-on in South Wales and wants to join the protest with Professor Jones. Now, Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart is headed to the mine with UNIT to investigate the incident over the concern of international conspiracy. The Doctor refuses to go with the Brigadier, and in that case, Joe, because she's going to be headed to the same place, and decides to travel to Metabolus 3 alone. He says his goodbyes to Joe and leaves, and while he finally reaches the long-desired destination, the time there is not what he expected. The wildlife is hostile, and the climate is not much better. He's immediately attacked by both and seems to have a long, treacherous adventure, while Joe and Jones begin to get to know each other, and the Brigadier goes to talk to the guy who's running the Global Chemicals site. And the Brigadier is refusing to shut off the mine. He wants to investigate it as soon as the Doctor arrives. And after surviving the harrowing trip to Metabolus 3, the Doctor now gladly makes his way to Wales to assist the Brigadier in a much more mundane setting. Stevens, the head of Global Chemicals, seems a bit off. He seems to be adamant that no one goes down into the mine at all costs. And after giving his security guy the order to make sure the Brigadier and the Doctor do not go there, Stevens puts on a headset connected to a computer to receive further instructions. Meanwhile, Joe has already arrived at the mine to look around, where a second man has gotten infected with the Green Death. Now, when the Brigadier and the Doctor arrive at the mine, Joe and that other miner have now become trapped down in the mine to retrieve the guy who was down there who we saw get infected. Now, the Doctor tries to figure out a way to get into the mine to save them, but Global Chemicals is not interested in assisting them. And as it turns out, Stevens and others at Global Chemicals are under the control of a supercomputer that is actually running the company. The supercomputer, we find out later, is named Boss. In fact, as far as we know, or as far as anybody who's not under the control of Boss, they just keep referring to doing what the boss told them to do. So the Doctor soon discovers there is sabotage afoot at the mine, and to prevent people from going down there to investigate what's going on. Professor Jones helps the Doctor by creating a diversion for the guards while the Doctor sneaks into the area where he expects to find the equipment needed to help rescue Joe from the mines at the Global Chemicals site. But Boss orders Stevens to apprehend the Doctor and question him. Stevens confirms that he does not have the equipment needed to get into the mine to free Joe and the other miners that she's down there with, but the Brigadier happened across a man with a cutter at the petrol station. So I guess it's like they say, the best laid plans of Boss and Stevens, right? But anyway, in one of the tunnels in the shaft, Joe and the miner she descended with discover a strange trail of green slime that is luminous. That miner that she's with touches the goop and quickly becomes weak and ill with the Green Death. He'll actually later succumb to it rather quickly. But the Doctor, now able to follow into the mine to save them, also discovers the green goop. And up just ahead in the shaft, Joe and the Doctor eventually reunite and discover a river of green slime and a bunch of giant maggots squirming around in it. Their path out of that section of the mine caves in, and as more of these kind of giant maggots start to block their path out of the mine. But the Doctor and Joe make their way out of the mine, but the Brigadier intends to take over operations at Global Chemicals. And Stevens basically threatens the Brigadier and tells him to tread carefully or he will have to bring in the people in high places that he's associated with. And sure enough, after a heated conversation with the Minister of Ecology, the Brigadier is eventually shut down by the Prime Minister himself. Meanwhile, in the mine, the Doctor and Joe discover giant eggs, and so the Doctor decides to grab one for study. More on that egg a little bit later, but they also discover Global Chemicals is dumping crude oil waste into the mine. And the Doctor and Joe are very nearly killed by Global Chemicals planning to dump the waste into the very pipe that they're escaping through until they are saved by an employee named Mr. Elgin, who is rather curious about why certain members of the staff are starting to act strangely. The one Elgin found acting most strange, Mr. Fell, is told to kill himself by Boss after proving his mental conditioning was a failure. So later, the Doctor, Joe, and the Brigadier are dining with Professor Jones, and Jones talks about going into the Amazon in about a month or so to find a particular strain of fungus that could replace protein sources like meat to solve population and ecological issues. The Doctor soon learns that the other miner that Joe went with in the mine shaft, like I said, succumbed quickly to the green goop infection. And it turns out that it's some sort of virus that attacks every cell of a person's body. And the Doctor intends to study the egg that he pulled from the mine, but Stevens sends his goon to capture that egg so that the Doctor doesn't get any idea of what's going on down there. But before either can do their thing, the egg hatches and a giant maggot starts squirming its way around an unsuspecting Joe. Now, as Joe is about to be attacked by the maggot, luckily Stephen's goon sneaks into Professor Jones's house and diverts the attention of the maggot, and it attacks the guy and ultimately kind of slithers away and disappears. The Doctor does have the green goop to analyze, though, and the Jones and the Doctor discover that green goo has a transmutative property that basically turns human cells into maggot-like cells. They don't turn the people into maggots, but the cells are basically becoming maggot-like in terms of what the maggot cells are. So it essentially is killing people from the inside out by transmutating those cells. But meanwhile, a full unit platoon is now stationed at the mine where they plan to blow up the mine under direct orders from Stevens, who has the authority now from the Ministry of Ecology. The Doctor attempts to talk to Stevens and try to get him to stop the order to blow up the mine, but is ultimately unsuccessful. And while the Brigadier had no choice in blowing up the mine, he doesn't trust Stevens. So, to get an inside man in Global Chemicals, he calls in Captain Mike Yates. The destruction of the mine is starting to have pretty massive side effects, though. The maggots start to come up the waste pipe in the facility and begin crawling out of the ground and taking over the countryside. The maggots are proving to be pretty indestructible, too. They seem to feed off of any known pesticides sprayed at them. They are also bulletproof. The Doctor realizes about the only countermeasure that he can conceive of is a biological agent that will essentially neutralize them. And the Doctor sneaks into the facility back at Global Chemicals and tries to get a sample of the waste for Jones to experiment with and try to find what can kill the maggots and also cure the people of the Green Death. However, Jones soon discovers, thanks to a little clumsiness from Joe, that one of his samples of fungi that he has is the cure to both the Green Death and the maggots. Now, after learning from Yates that Stevens takes his orders from someone else who has an office at the very top floor of the facility, the Doctor comes face to, terminal with Boss itself. Now, elsewhere, unit has learned the RAF is about to bomb the hell out of the countryside to rid themselves of the maggot problem. But Boss explains that he's the first of his kind because he is connected to a human brain, specifically that of Stevens. Boss is basically pulling all the strings here at Global Chemicals. Now, the doctor believes the computer is simply just that, a computer. A megalomaniac, sure, but a computer nonetheless. The doctor tricks Boss into an unanswerable logic problem. And basically, it's the most simple one that I've ever seen used, which is if the doctor tells Boss that the next thing he says is absolutely true, but that the last thing he said was absolutely false, would Boss be able to believe the next thing the doctor said? So this sends Boss into that cycle of trying to resolve that thought experiment while Stevens with a couple of guards arrive to find the doctor. Now, Stevens and Boss attempt to basically take control of the doctor, but ultimately prove unsuccessful as the doctor is able to easily fight off their mental conditioning. But the RAF bombing proves to also be ineffective against the maggots. Worse, Joe and Professor Jones were stuck in the bombing and were forced to take shelter. But the maggots are also closing in on the outside. After the doctor is then used as a bargaining chip for Stevens and Boss, he and Captain Yates, who's the inside man for the Brigadier, they escape the facility, but Mike is captured while the doctor rejoins the Brigadier. Now, the doctor and Benton are able to save Joe and Professor Jones. Everything is fine there. And in a feverish state, Professor Jones speaks only a single word, serendipity, which leads the doctor to try to figure out what was the happy accident, the definition of serendipity, that Professor Jones might be referring to, and does it have anything to do with the potential cure for all of the problems with the maggots and the Green Death. But worse, Jones is also infected with the Green Death. Now, Captain Yates returns to where the doctor and Jones are at Professor Jones's house, and but Yates has been conditioned by Boss to kill the doctor, but the doctor uses the blue sapphire from Metebelis 3 to basically break that control over Yates. So he sends him back with the blue sapphire to break some of the people out of Boss's control and learn what Boss's primary plan is going to be. And Yates discovers that at 4 p.m., Boss is going to start taking over things. There's some mention of being able to take over computers in other parts of the world. I think there are 7 other supercomputers. It's mentioned that Boss will take over. And it seems as though Boss is also implanting chips inside of employees that will give Boss direct control over human brains as well. So that's his big plan to take over the computers and chip all of these people to basically take over humanity. Now, the doctor rushes to find a cure for the Green Death because the maggots are starting to shed their husks, proving that they are near metamorphosis. And that means that they might be able to fly soon. And if that occurs, everything is at risk because they won't be able to stop an airborne carry of this virus. Now, they soon discover a dead maggot in Professor Jones's house. And the cause of the death? Well, some of the fungus that they eat within the commune. Now, Benton and the doctor take as much of the fungus they can out into the field to feed the maggots, and that quickly kills them off. One problem, though, there is one which already turned into a flying dragonfly-like creature that spits the green goop. Now, the doctor is able to use his cape to basically swat the bug out of the sky and kills it. And back at Professor Jones's place, the doctor discovers that the same fungus that they used to kill the maggots will be used to create a cure for the Green Death. And the doctor returns to Global Chemicals and frees Stevens with the sapphire, and Stevens is pretty upset about what Boss has done to him. So he tells the doctor to get out as soon as he possibly can, and he reroutes all of the power in the computer station to basically blow Boss and the entire facility sky high. The doctor tells Joe that they had better return to Unit HQ, but Joe says that she's not returning to Unit. Instead, she wants to go to the Amazon with Jones, so that she can help him find the various protein sources in the fungi that can help solve some of the starvation issues in population centers. But he then proposes marriage to Joe, and she accepts. Everyone celebrates Joe and Cliff, and the doctor bids Joe a fond farewell and wishes her well, and he gives her their wedding gift early, the blue sapphire from Metebelis 3. The doctor, sad that he is no longer going to be traveling with his dearest friend Joe, quietly sees himself out while Joe sadly watches him leave through the door to get into Bessie and return to Unit. Let's talk about the 3 things I like about the Green Death. First, this is a very good modern tale for Doctor Who. Modern contemporarily, like in 1973. Sure, I love me some giant maggot monsters made by inflated party balloons. Yeah, I love the idea in the early days of supercomputers being built, one that might end up having its own megalomaniacal plans for taking over the world and what have you. But this is much more than that. It's a tale of environmentalism at first. The coal mine where Global Chemicals is dumping all their waste is closed because coal, even in 1973, was considered to be a power source of the past. Global Chemicals comes swooping in, trying to convince everyone that they are here to save this town wrecked by the closure of the mine. And Stevens promises money for everyone, jobs for everyone, but Global Chemicals is a chemical company that might just prove to be detrimental to the environment. So, yeah, early on, we see how this company trying to find a way to make petrol more affordable for everyone is a threat to the world on a physical level, while creating that dichotomy that ends up happening in these types of situations, which are, well, people need jobs to survive and people need livelihoods and they need money and they need all of this, but is their job ethical if it's harming the world? But so it kind of creates that conversation as well. But it also, because of that, basically shifts to a take on capitalism. Global Chemicals, under the control of Boss, is simply put a global mega corporation. They will make basically claim to and will more or less say that they're going to make everyone's life easier while underhandedly destroying the environment. So, and then finally collecting a ton of profits. The doctor himself even comments on the fact that, you know, this corporation is going to end up profiting off of things that aren't ethical. And Global Chemicals requires brainwashing for people to get on board with their plans. So their plans aren't good for people as much as they claim they are good for people. It's a pretty good tale of modern early 70s ideas that are still prudent today. They even toss in a little, how do you feed the population we already have, let alone how can we provide if we expand our population plot with Professor Jones's study in fungi and other alternate protein. And there's even the comment made by the Brigadier at once that he would rather just eat beef than the fungus that is being grown to basically taste and do the same things in a health perspective as the protein and the taste of beef. So that's all still something that more than 50 years later is still something that is talked about. You know, nobody wants the veggie burger from Burger King, even though in some ways it does taste better than their regular Whoppers, but whatever. It's funny how some of these things that are kind of brought up in this story kind of under the surface of a deadly virus and these giant maggots are still able to be talked about today. Second, there's a fun little bit in the 4th episode of the serial. The doctor has to sneak into the facility at Global Chemicals to get a sample of the waste for Professor Jones. Now, Yates sends the coded message to the doctor and Brigadier that it's too highly guarded. So the doctor gets the idea to impersonate the milkman and drive into the facility as if he's just there to do the regular rounds. And he puts on a fake mustache and pretends to be a blathering old fool to basically get past the guard at the gate, because he just keeps talking and the guard's like, shut up, I don't have time for this, just go and do your job. But when Boss realizes that there's an intruder in the facility, the doctor then dresses as the cleaning lady at the facility. Now, while mostly this era of Doctor Who took itself pretty seriously, or at least played everything fairly straight, this is a pretty in-your-face comedic set of scenes. It's played like something out of a comedy, even down to the doctor warning Mike to not say anything to anyone else about having to disguise himself in drag. Most of the time, the lighthearted nature of this run is in the familial relationships between the doctor, the Brigadier, Benton, Yates, Joe, and even earlier with Liz. Not only does this play for a nice little chuckle to solve the issue of how the doctor will get into the facility despite the facility being heavily guarded, it does show a great deal of range for Jon Pertwee too. I mean, he's always been thought of as a great actor, but he gets to play up the other thing that he was well known for, comedy. And it's just a really fun little series of scenes that I just like, and it's something that you don't see enough back in these days of Doctor Who, where he's going out of his way to get into costumes to gain access to some place that he shouldn't be. Lastly, this farewell to Jo Grant is bittersweet, but nonetheless perfect. Her 3-year run on Doctor Who was really a large character arc. At the start of her run, she's clumsy, which she still is throughout her time with the Doctor. She was a bit of a ditz, even though, she kind of plays a little bit more happy-go-lucky. But, she is very much a younger person, and she's curious about things, but she's nowhere near the scientific mind of Liz Shaw. However, Jo is affable and willing to learn. And it really does come off as if she's fresh from school and kind of young. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if the idea was that she was meant to be like only 18 or 19 when she first appeared. She makes the mention that her uncle worked for the United Nations, and that's how she was able to get into UNIT to have a pretty good steady job. It's brought up again at the end of this serial when she uses her familial connection at the United Nations to help get Professor Jones the access to funding and to a laboratory in South America to be able to do his research further. But by the time we reach this serial, Jo's done a great deal of growing up. She's headstrong about wanting to make a positive change in the world, and she's clearly taken a shine to Cliff Jones even before meeting him. And part of that is her still younger idealism and kind of schoolgirl crush on this dashing professor. He appeals to her because she sees him as a younger version of the Doctor, which indicates that she sees the Doctor as both a father figure that helped her grow up, but also sees the qualities in the mentor and that father figure type that she will grow to desire in men closer to her age. There was a time for adventure in her youth and earlier days in UNIT, but now it's time for, as the Doctor even states, the fledgling fly the coop. So then, as the end of this serial, it's both a joyous and solemn occasion. On one side, everyone is so happy. Jo is all grown up and taking life seriously and both settling down and continuing her adventure with a different kind of Doctor. The Doctor is, though, incredibly sad to see her go, but he's also got this conflict with him because he's also happy for her, but he can't really show that happiness. He gives her a fond farewell, but leaves kind of unannounced from her now engagement party and makes his way back to Unit HQ. It's a really sad goodbye that reminds me of the first Doctor's farewell to Susan, where he gladly accepts her choice in life, but will step away without any further discussion, no matter what that makes him feel. It's her time to leave him. And even when I was a kid, I felt sad at the end of this serial because, just seeing the Doctor walk away from Joe's happy occasion, and the way that it ends with Joe and Cliff kissing each other, cutting to the Doctor riding off in silhouette during twilight. It's kind of a sad shot. And I did feel bad for the Doctor because at the end of the serial, he seemed so lonely at this point. And I felt bad for her because this was her friend, mentor, and father figure, essentially turning away from her during the celebration that is meant to be her happy occasion, stepping into a new life. It's really well done. As far as the end of the serial. And it's the only time in Pertwee's run that he actually had to say goodbye to someone close to him. Liz left without any notice. The unit guys remain around. And as we'll talk next week about Sarah Jane Smith, his follow-up companion that becomes much more the quintessential Fourth Doctor's companion, that separation doesn't happen during Pertwee's run. But it's a good performance at the end of the serial by both Jon Pertwee and Katie Manning, and is one of my favorite final scenes between a Doctor and a companion in the entire series. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Wednesday morning Film Seizure podcast and the Monday afternoon Monster Monday show at your favorite podcast providers. We also upload the stuff to YouTube. And you can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, we wrap up this month full of stories of the Third Doctor with his final bow as the lead of the series when he visits the world of Metabulus 3 one last time and what has become the planet of the spiders. Until next week, stay spooky.